Of all these college quarterbacks, which one fits the Vikings the best? I think it's Drake Maye. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers. I appreciate you all so very much. You all make this show go around. Help, especially during the off season when we're all just sitting here waiting for news. I appreciate you. If you are new here, hello and welcome. You can find this show Monday through Friday, wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is a podcast listening app like SiriusXM or YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app on your smart TV. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, let's talk a little bit about what scheme fit means. Scheme, is this guy a scheme fit or whatever? I think is one of the most, the thing that gets discussed the most while being paired with the least actual, substantive analysis, I guess. You'll hear it all the time, won't you? Like, this quarterback fits Kevin O'Connell's scheme. But what, is that? What is the quarterback that fits Kevin O'Connell's scheme? If you built a QB in a lab, that's perfect for Kevin O'Connell's scheme. What is that guy? Does he run? Doesn't he run? And to be honest, most of the time when I hear about scheme, if you really get down to it, people are talking about run-pass ratio. Maybe they're talking about play action usage, right? And a good play action quarterback is a scheme fit for a McVay tree coach. And maybe that's what they're talking about. And yeah, that if you use a lot of play action, you got a QB that's good at play action. That's a skill, right? Being good at play action is a skill. It's a big Kirk thing. But when I want to try to expand what we mean when we talk about scheme fit. I don't think we're going deep enough. So let's go a little bit deeper today. And in particular, I think that the pros and cons of Drake Maye line up really well with Kevin O'Connell's offense, what it asks of quarterbacks and what it doesn't ask of quarterbacks super often. Now, here's the thing about the Kevin O'Connell scheme. It is a fairly fluid thing. We saw that when we had to cycle through a whole bunch of quarterbacks. A lot of the smaller details and nuances that I guess feel like small details to us, but are actually fairly big structural things to a quarterback were different. Things like drop depth and drop back rhythm, things like, protection calls and stuff like that, launch points, whether or not you're dovetailing your drop back or not. All of those things feel like small details that if you aren't specifically looking for them, and if you're not training your eye to look for them, you're not even going to really necessarily notice them on game day. But to a quarterback, it changes everything about the way that they throw and think. So we have seen that he will tailor some of this stuff to his quarterback. So in terms of are all of these quarterbacks good scheme fits? They're all at least going to be a fine scheme fit. And this was middle of the season, on the fly change-ups, which I think that O'Connell did mess up a couple times trying to do this, but the willingness to do it is what we're looking at right now, because now with an off season to design something, he's going to be able to. Obviously, the Kirk Cousins offense being run by a quarterback like Josh Dobbs, who's so different from Kirk Cousins, was only really going to work out in the circus ball improv mode, which is, to be honest, where we saw a lot of the really cool Josh Dobbs stuff during the Pastronaut moment. And then when that stuff started getting taken away and he had to operate in the structure of the offense, it was super wrong for him and it failed. So then he tried to come out with a new game plan in Vegas, and that game plan was better suited to Josh Dobbs, but did really bad. So they benched him. That was the story of that. So it can only ever be, at worst, fine. So with Drake Maye, what that offense will look like, and I think the reason I kind of have this take is timing. Drake Maye is a timing quarterback, and he's or at least at UNC in that last year under Chip Lindsey, first year of Chip Lindsey at UNC. He was a pre-snap reader more than he was a post-snap reader. This is stylistic. The one thing is not necessarily better or worse than the other. It's very much a matter of preference. Pre-snap readers will be able to get the ball out quicker. They'll be able, Drew Brees, right, was phenomenal at this, was able to, get the ball out, make a decision, use pre-snap information to be able to determine the coverage, and that's more than just look, there's 2 high safeties. This is cover 2, right? Like using tendencies to understand when they're disguising and all that stuff. He could do all that, Drake Maye. And like Loki, a guy who's good at that too, Bo Nix. That's all he did at Oregon. But Maye, I thought, did a little bit more of that. There are reps on his tape that are him like actually going like progression, post-snap processing, back off, safety's doing that. Okay, that's my read, that's my read, that's my read. You can see that. It just didn't come up as often. And I think that's more of a strategic decision on UNC's part, which then kind of leads you to the question of like, okay, why were they doing a bunch of pre-snap stuff? Can he not do post-snap, blah, blah, blah. And I think that it's fine on the quarterback because something at UNC is that the protections were really bad. And I don't just mean that the linemen got beat a lot, which they did sometimes. Sometimes Drake Maye would drift out of the pocket and cause his own problems. We'll get to that. But more, the really bad stuff was like busted protections or bad protection calls or missed assignments, miscommunications, free rushers, problems that aren't on the quarterback at all, unless the quarterback is the one setting that protection. Now, I've asked around a little bit, and I don't know if I have like a definitive, like firsthand answer from a UNC staffer or anything like that. I don't think I've been able to find anybody that has that information, but I do believe that Drake Maye was setting protections. Please correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in the know. So that is something that I would be a little concerned about is like, is he properly identifying fronts? What's happening there? And that is the kind of thing that you're going to ask about when you hear, like when you have a private workout with Drake Maye, which I believe the Vikings are done with all their private workouts. I know that they are going to do private workouts with all of those like top 6 quarterbacks. I think they just did the Penix one. I think they did the Knicks one forever ago, and the Caleb Williams one. They had a couple of them at the Combine. They just like flew to Michigan for a JJ McCarthy one. So I think they've done all, and I think they've done Drake Maye like a good bit ago. So I think they've done all of them. And I wonder if at those meetings, one of the things that you ask Drake Maye about is, hey, how'd you do with protections? There's also something you can ask Josh McCown about. I don't know how common it is to have protections like, jet protections and protections with like adjustments in them at the high school level. They are a little bit more often just burned into the play call, and we're just going to either slide the protection or not or whatever. And pass pros a little bit is taught a little differently. There's not quite as much complexity to it until you get to the higher levels. But so I don't know exactly what Josh McCown's like base of familiarity is with Drake Maye there, but that does feel like something you would talk about, right? Hey, this protection busted. What happened there? Were you in charge of it? What's the deal? Right? And the answer that you get will be enlightening. So I'm a little concerned, I guess, about that, but otherwise the pre-snap process and all of the things that O'Connell asks pre-snap, especially what he asks of her Cousins pre-snap, I would feel pretty good about with Drake Maye. And what was really cool with watching that first couple drives of Jaren Hall in Atlanta before the disaster Green Bay game, the Atlanta game that was pretty good, is that we saw him like dialing a lot at the line of scrimmage. This is something O'Connell really likes to do, is put a lot of options and checks and adjustments and little buttons and levers to pull in the pre-snap process. Try to get out of the huddle fast so you get to the line of scrimmage with 15 seconds to go, do a hard count, gather information about the defense, and then you have audibles you can check into, you have protection calls you can make, you have route adjustments you can make, and just dealing at the line of scrimmage like a if you've ever watched like a competitive Madden player, I know this sounds crazy, but if you ever watch a competitive Madden player, they will use a ton of pre-snap stuff to like mix and match a lot of routes, and it's like a real life version of that, where you have access to a lot of different adjustments and communications. It's just really difficult to install that. It's really difficult to run it. But the downside is in installing it, not like the downside. Once you have it and everyone's comfortable with it, it's like only better to have more options at the line of scrimmage, as long as, your guys can handle it. And I think Drake Maye can handle it. I think that's a huge part of what makes him a good scheme fit for Kevin O'Connell, is that he will be able to handle all of the pre-snap stuff that O'Connell wants to do. But then there's also the timing aspect of it. And once you've made your selections and your decisions pre-snap, and once you've kind of gone through that mental process, that's what I want to talk about next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And for some legal info, claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Thanks a whole bunch for listening to this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, for making it your first listen of the day. And when you're done here, go check out the Locked On Minnesota Sports YouTube page and their 24/7 live streaming channel. Minnesota Sports all day, every day, coming at your ear holes. From Locked On Timberwolves to Twins to this show, Locked On Vikings, Wild, etc. Go check that out at the YouTube page. Just search out Locked On Minnesota Sports. Let's talk now about kind of the post-snap process, which is obviously the lion's share of like QB evaluation. But when we're talking scheme fit here, so to me, when I watched Drake Maye, I saw him as an internal clock player. And I think sometimes I will put that out as a negative. Like for me, that was a negative for Kirk Cousins, that he wasn't feeling pressure coming. He wasn't using peripheral vision and adapting to changing information. He was counting in his head. And that means that you could be under no pressure, but if it's been long enough, you're still going to feel like you want to bail. I think O'Connell had him not do that at the end in the last couple of years. That was more of a like Zimmer era, Kubiak era thing. And that can just be something that is up to your coach and your offensive coordinator, right? Depending on what plays you're trying to run, you might want exactly that. I know Nate Tice talks about that a lot. And I think when he played that, the way he talks about it, I would assume that the way he played, that was the way that he was coached to do it, is you drop back, right? You go through your reads, but in the back of your head, there's a little ticking timer. And once it's been too long, you're just kind of assuming somebody's gotten by now. I'm going to have to make something happen. And you drop your eyes and you start, initiate the scramble drill process, whatever that is for your team. But then there are some quarterbacks that don't need to like count it, right? That can sort of simultaneously process what is going on downfield, but also have a little bit of attention paid to their periphery to see if anybody's coming. And I think that those are the more sustainable situations, because you will react to what is actually happening, not just what tends to happen after a certain amount of time. You'll be accurate more often with that information. But I digress. As an internal clock player and somebody that has that sort of idea of rhythm, I do think that even though I don't know if O'Connell is teaching things that way, and Chris O'Hara, who was a QB coach last year, or now Josh McCown, like I don't know how those guys are going to teach it, but what it does tell you is that he has a sense for rhythm, right? And we're looking for a skill set, not necessarily just is he used to the scheme. There's more to scheme fit than did he play in that scheme before, right? Like we're looking for a skill set, and in that skill set, you have that internal clock that tells you can keep an internal clock, right? And so much of Kevin O'Connell's offense is predicated on the internal clock. And with Kirk in the last 2 years, the timing got really, really tight, like really close. And that was sick, right? That led to a lot of the big Justin Jefferson stuff, was just being really on time with all that stuff. And I think that was another big difference when Kevin O'Connell got here from like the Kubiak family years. And I think with that propensity to have that internal rhythm, that understanding that, okay, 1 beat, I'm on my first read. 2 beat, I gotta be to my second read, right? 3 beat, I gotta be to my third read. It insulates you from certain problems that can crop up if a running, or if a route runner messes up, right? If a wide receiver runs the route too slow, you aren't going to be held up staring at it. And then by the time you move on, you move on to your second route, well, now that thing's broken off and it's late, right? Like if that route is too slow and I ran for 2 steps more than I should be, and I break it off and I don't get open, now the quarterback is moving off of me to his second read, and now that guy is 2 steps further into the route than he's supposed to be, and that might be enough for a defensive back to close a window that otherwise would have been open, and you can't move on until you kind of see that route break off. Wide receivers can screw their quarterbacks in this way, and a lot of the time you'll see that play, and you'll hear somebody say, QB stared him down, blah, 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 but really, they are taught to, watch that break and then move on, make a decision and then move on. But with that internal rhythm, you can avoid that. And if all right, it's been a beat. I'm supposed to have either thrown this or moved on by now. Okay, I got to move on. And he screwed up the route. That's on him. I'm moving on. And you'll still be able to kind of find that. And so it makes it so that a wide receiver screwing up a route, it minimizes the impact that can have on the play. I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at. And a lot of the Kevin O'Connell offense, and this is like a McVay drop back game thing in general, is based on timing. It is precisely timed. Everything is, counted off to the step and to the yard. So ideally what you have, and the design of this, the function of this, is you've got that first route breaking is usually going to be the fastest thing. A lot of times it's choice, like an option route, 5-yard option route. And while you're reading choice, deeper routes are developing. So ideally, you go read choice, and you either throw it or you don't. And if you come off of it, in the time it takes for that route to be run and read, your second read has run the whole stem of his route, and now he's breaking as soon as you move on to him, so that you can make that decision, and it's very comfortable and natural to get that ball on the body on the break. Thing is, to really have this take confidently, you have to do a little bit of psychoanalysis of Drake Maye, which is obviously not easy to do from the outside or from the bird's eye view from just looking at tape. Like, you can kind of try to guess what's going through his head, but you can only ever guess. And again, this is what these private meetings are for, or pro day workouts or combine meetings are for, right? Is sitting them down and saying, what I think I know what you were thinking there. I think I know what was going through your head, but you tell me what was going through your head on that particular play. What were you looking at, right? What were you thinking? For example, I guess I'll get into the pressure thing. So this is something that I think has gotten the most diverse answers from Drake Maye, from people analyzing Drake Maye. Like, I know QB Class, Derek Klassen, has a totally different read on this than I do, which I find really, really fascinating, because I think it's all super valid. We're all just like trying to figure out what's going on through his head, right? But you will see him drift a lot. He is a drifty quarterback. Everybody sees it, right? He will abandon his launch point. That maybe is a more technical way to say it. You get to the top of your drop, you're at the launch point that is meant for you in the play. And then Drake Maye will move away from that, which messes up the way the throwing lanes are, the way the angles were designed. A whole bunch of stuff that you've done on the whiteboard is now different than the way that you presupposed it. Some people have posited that this is actually an on-purpose part of the quarterback's footwork, and that he's looking for better angles that are part of the play design. That's not what I saw. I saw him finding angles that were more difficult than they could have been if he just stayed on his launch point. What I think he's doing is reacting to flashes of color. Most of the time when I saw him drift, you could see that it maybe wasn't even pressure. It's that some jersey of the wrong color showed him a little bit, and he saw it out of his periphery and he reacted to it, which again is probably why he's an internal clock guy, because that reacting to the peripheral vision and determining what is pressure and what is a guy just kind of getting to another shoulder or showing his face mask. I don't think that that's a developed skill set that he has. And again, it might not need to be. You can just be an internal clock guy. You can have a whole career in the NFL doing that. I mean, again, Kirk Cousins, he's like 36 he's going to be, and he's still in the NFL doing that. You can absolutely make a living there. But with that, flash of color, I'm going to drift thing, that's where you can get to, oops, I went outside my tackle's outside shoulder, and now the edge is coming after me, and the tackle suddenly had lost a rep that he was winning before, and I just screwed up his angle, right? So you can get to that. And I've talked a lot about that with Drake Maye, probably focused too much on it with Drake Maye because I really like Maye, but that's like the flaw, I guess. And especially if you're going to like compare him to JJ McCarthy. JJ McCarthy doesn't do that. And so there's like one of those things that McCarthy has on Maye that if somebody says, oh, this NFL team has JJ McCarthy over Drake Maye, I'm like, oh, it's probably because of that then. But I will say, for whatever it's worth, again, the busted protections up front were happening a lot. And it's sort of validated him in this tendency. And I don't think it's a tendency you want to validate, which is why I think having a good O-line up front is really important. And why I think the way that the Vikings O-line plays, specifically the way their tackles play, actually fit really well with Drake Maye because of the pass sets that they like to take on in certain situations. I'll explain that next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the best place to find last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% buying last minute for esports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so on. You can find a Gametime guarantee because Gametime knows that they have the lowest price. And if they're wrong, you find the same tickets in the same section and the same row for less. Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. That is their bet on themselves. You can also get a lot of more transparent information up front, right? You can see the view of the seat so that you can make sure you're not like getting stuck behind a pillar or anything like that. You're satisfied with the view. You can see your checkout total up front. So there is no hiding any fees or anything like that. You know exactly what you're paying up front. Go to gametime.co or download the Gametime app, create an account there, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Today's episode is also brought to you by eBay Motors. Your car is an extension of who you are. It's a thing that gets you from place to place. You have all kinds of memories in that car, and taking care of it is very important, but also so is personalizing it. eBay Motors has everything you need, whether you're doing the important but boring maintenance or you're trying to soup that thing up. They've got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and all kinds of stuff you might need under the hood as well. So whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. They have over 122 million parts for your car, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, you'll know that it will be the right kind of part for your car's make and model. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. So maybe the thing that I think fits the Vikings specifically the most about Drake Maye is kind of involved in this drifting. And that is that our tackles like to jump set. So if you're a very steeped in O-line person, you kind of can visualize exactly what I'm getting at here, right? A tackle jump sets out to the end, and it gives Drake Maye more room to drift. And if you know what I mean by that, then there, you get it. That's all you need to know. If you don't know what I mean by that, here's what I mean by that. So a jump set for an offensive lineman, and in particular at tackle, if you visualize it, right? Christian Darrisaw out at left tackle. He's got an edge rusher out, pretty far away from him, right? Maybe it's a wide 9 or maybe not even, but it's not somebody lined up right on his shoulder. So there's some space. That edge rusher wants that space. He wants to be able to take a couple of steps to feel you out, to force you to declare what kind of pass set that you're taking. And he wants to be able to use that space. There are guys that live with this kind of space. Nick Bosa is sort of the go-to example. He lives in this wide 9. He uses that space to set up whatever he's doing. He has 2-3 steps to set up his moves, so he can really force you with his athleticism. He can force you to commit, right? If he's going to try to speed rush or do something that sets up by making it look like it's a speed rush, he has a lot of space to get that head of steam and the change of ability and the agility to move, to work back across, right? So you don't want Nick Bosa to have that space on you. Now, if I recall, Darrisaw, when he played against he didn't get a lot of Nick Bosa in that San Francisco game. It was mostly O'Neal. But in the times when he did get Nick Bosa out in there, he would sort of take the fight to Nick Bosa, right? And this is something that Darrisaw loves to do. He loves to jump set because he is an egregiously aggressive tackle. And part of what has made Christian Darrisaw's game so good is that aggression, the punish for that aggression is something he can make up for with his particular brand of athleticism. So he sort of covers his own bases and he can play it super fast and loose. And one of those fast and loose things is a jump set. So you come out of your stance with a really, really powerful and strong horizontal step, and then a gather with your inside foot, and then your outside foot maybe even gets another step if he needs it, right? But basically, you are jumping right into the edge rusher's lap, and you're saying, you don't get all that space to set up. I'm taking this fight to you right now, and suddenly I'm in your face and I have my hands on you, and you didn't even get to start setting anything up. It's sort of trying to like almost get a sucker punch off, before the edge rusher even like starts to figure it out. It's taking what is usually a fairly reactive position, which is offensive line, where you're sitting there watching him set his thing up, trying to discern what is real, what isn't, what I should react to, what I shouldn't react to, and instead saying, I'm not going to let you do all your fancy schmancy pass rush moves that you've been drilling now for 20 years of your life. I'm just gonna take this fight to you, and you don't get to set anything. You're not gonna club my hands. You're not gonna try to swim me. You're not gonna try to rip me. I'm in your face. You didn't get anything done. The problem is, if you whiff here, you just gave that guy some momentum to counter you, and if he uses that momentum against you, he's gonna get a free run to the quarterback, and you're gonna get yelled at. But with Darrisaw, a lot of the time, if you do get that momentum countered, he can actually flip his hips and move around. Super cool stuff. As it pertains to Drake Maye, it means that there are a lot of pass sets where the left tackle is going pretty far horizontal. And this is like a spacing thing. He's setting out into the edge rusher, and that widens the pocket a little bit. That's not desirable for everybody. Sometimes a nice deep pocket, depending on what kind of drop back depths you want to do, is a little better. For example, for somebody like what the Vikings tried to do with Jaren Hall. This was sort of at the core of their failure against Green Bay with Jaren Hall, was that Jaren Hall was doing 7-step play action dropbacks that take a lot of depth. And that's what he was used to from BYU. That's what they wanted to run with him. But to protect for that, you have to go deep. And so if Christian Darrisaw is going to jump set somebody, that extra width that he's getting isn't doing anybody any favors, and you're getting absolutely no depth. You're not protecting where that launch point is. So you better get to him. And guess what? You play a really risky style like that, you maybe aren't going to get to him. And Darrisaw gave up. I think he gave up a side. He had one of his worst games there. And I think that's a fit thing. With Drake Maye, giving him that extra width, and also the fact that he's coming off of a UNC offense that was a ton of 1-step drops, 3-step drops, quick game, right? Pre-snap, go, tightly execute. And that is the part of Drake Maye's game that excites me the most, because that's the part that's your bread and butter on Sundays. Take the snap, clean footwork, deliver a quick pass, be decisive, get the ball out fast. Nobody's ever going to pressure you doing that. Right? You can have the worst O-line in the league. You get the ball out in a second and a half, you won't get any pressure at all. even against the most fearsome pass rushes. There were plenty of teams, again, going back to Drew Brees would neutralize pressure like crazy doing it that way because he was very tight with his execution, and the quick game footwork was immensely consistent. So it was always perfectly timed. The ball was right where it needed to be, when it needed to be there. Impossible to defend that when it's that perfect and precise. And that is how Drew Brees, especially in his older years, led some really, really prolific offenses. I think Drake Maye can have that same impact on your quick game, which again allows you to jump set and be really aggressive and even like short setup get into guys' faces, because the time it takes them to counter you is going to slow them down just enough where if it's quick game, the ball can get out. Now, if he's got to hold the ball because it's a longer drop, the punish is a lot worse there. So you can't do that on 7-step drops. But that's what this O-line is built to do quick game and to get that pocket wide. So if he does want to drift and find a new launch point, if that's going to be his habit, he can get away with it here. That's why I think Drake Maye is a really good fit. It's a lot of nitty-gritty football stuff, but guess what? That's where the game lies. Not in run pass ratio or depth of target or whatever random fantasy stat you want to try to throw at me. So that's why I would be backflips if Drake Maye is the Vikings pick somehow. If they get up to 3 and he's the guy, backflips. Obviously no guarantee about that. Could be JJ McCarthy, could be Jaden Daniels, although I really think that guy's a commander. Could be someone else, right? They could get shunned out of the trade market entirely or whatever. But if they trade up to 3 with New England and they end up with Drake Maye, it's a match made in heaven. And I don't think the Vikings disagree because they hired his high school coach as the QB's coach. So I think that there is a vision here, and we'll just see if the Patriots let him realize it. We're still on trade watch here, so eventually something's going to happen, and I'll be here for you no matter what it is. I will see y'all tomorrow, and as always, Skull.